Hey, welcome guys. How's everybody doing? Man, I am on West Coast time this morning. I just got back from some vacation time out in, well, it was Seattle and then to Forks and Port Angeles and Olympic National Park, which is, by the way, if you ever get a chance, go. It's so gorgeous. And then on up through the north of Washington into Vancouver. Gosh, it's just, sometimes we need to get out of our concrete jungles to know the beauty that God has put in creation. Because you cannot walk around that place and go, look how great we are. You can't. You just can't. You walk around that place and you go, man, God is so big. What he has made is so beautiful. And I just, I don't know. It was really good, but it's good to be back. Josh Lenon, he's not here right now, but man, oh, there he is. Yeah, you are there. Crushed it last week. So Josh, thanks for what you shared and all the goodness that was there as we continue to talk about this idea of being in exile. It's one of the major themes of all the Bible. And it's one of those ones that if you start to catch the theme, you see it from the first pages all the way through to the last pages. From where exile begins, right there in that garden, when they choose to rebel against God, eat the fruit, and God comes and then he doesn't slaughter them, but he removes them from the garden and says, you cannot stay here. Because if you stay here in this fallen place, continuing to have access to this tree of life, you will live forever in your sin. And there is no way that's going to happen. And so he exiles them from the garden. And if you follow Genesis and its opening pages, that removal from the garden eventually culminates in the story of the Tower of Babel. And so it leads to essentially a version of Babylon. So it should be no wonder then that we read through the Old Testament and we see Israel planted into the promised land, like a new Eden. But they also, like Adam and Eve, they don't choose to follow God. They choose their own path of rebellion and destruction. And so God sends along Nebuchadnezzar, who drives them out of the land and into Babylon. All of these acts of rebellion find themselves in what's called Babylon in Scripture. And Babylon is that place of exile. It's the place where things are not what they ought to be. It's where you were removed from your home, separated from God, the future you wanted, disoriented, disrupted, life in a place you did not want to be. It's where we find ourselves so often. It's why this theme of exile is so powerful to understand, because it helps orient you to where you are in life right now. When you're like, I thought when I came to God, everything was going to work out, and then it doesn't. And you're like, wait a second, what? Hold on. I thought if I was a Christian, then my life goes well. That's the way it should work, but it doesn't. That's because that's not the part of the story you're currently in. And that's why understanding this theme of exile is so important. It's why the New Testament writers, specifically Peter, talk to the church as those in exile. When Peter opens up his first letter that he sends out, look at this. It's right here in 1 Peter 1. Here's his opening line. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout. And all of those are places in Turkey. He goes, look, you're scattered throughout the world. You were exiles. You're not there. And later on, he says in 1 Peter 2:11, he goes, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. And he's pushing this understanding of you were exiles. And exile is somebody who's not in their home country anymore. You don't live at home anymore is what he's saying. You've lost home. You're not there. You're in another place. An exile is somebody who's moved to another place and they're finding themselves as sojourners, foreign residents in the land. Now, they're not vacationers. It's not like what I did. An exile knows that they are taking root in that place, in that country, as somebody who is not native to that space. They're living there as a foreigner, as an exile, and they're somebody who you don't fully accommodate, you don't fully assimilate into that culture. You're there as somebody who's different in that place. And this is the Christian life. We are people who find ourselves not quite at home, not in a land that we want to be in. My daughter's story, she asked this question. I mean, it's probably every other week as we drive to school in the mornings, where she's just looking at life. She's 13. And she's hearing the stories of Scripture, and she knows that in the end, God's going to make all things new. He's going to set this world right. He's going to stop the injustice. He's going to heal sickness and disease. He's going to put an end to death and war. And she will ask me, gosh, it's probably every other week. She goes, Dad, when is God going to make all things new again? How long is this going to take? You know what that is? It's the words of somebody who knows they're not at home, and they're just like, I just want to be home. How long? Are we there yet? Is what your kid asks when you're driving in the car and you're like, no. How long? I don't know. Like, it's just, we're not there yet. And that's the truth. We're not there yet. This is what the writer of Hebrews, he has this section, we sometimes call Hebrews 11 the Hall of Faith, or like, there's all these examples of people who live by faith in the Old Testament, in these older writings, and he's just making an example one after the other. But look what he says at the end of this in Hebrews 11. I want you to see this. It's so important. He goes, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They didn't see it. They were sojourners. They were exiles. They were still holding out hope, living by faith, because their life was not arriving to the point they wanted to. They weren't there yet. They did not receive the things promised in this life. They only saw them, and they welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers. You could say exiles on earth. It goes on. He says, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, well, they would have, if they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, look at this. They were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so, they are looking for that city, that place. It's a place you crave. I mean, after all of these days of traveling, you start thinking about home. You start going like, what is home? Where is home? And in many ways, for me, home is when I can finally, after, a long time of traveling back. Planes, trains, automobiles, you're finally getting back. And home is when I can crawl into my bed with my pillow and lay my head down and go, isn't that home? Those of you who've been gone from that space and you're just like, I'm tired of hotel beds. I just want my bed. Where you can just go, I think there's a lot of us. Does this not explain life? Where you're like, I just don't feel like I'm home. That is what it means to live in exile. And how many of our prayers, how many of our things, how many of our desires are, God, can you just get me out of this, 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 just get out. And he goes, you don't understand the story. My bud, you're living in exile. You're not home yet, but I have prepared a place for you, a heavenly city, one that's coming, your ultimate home. It's a place of complete rest. And there is that question of how do we get home then? And that's not today's teaching. That's coming in a couple weeks. We'll talk about that. Today's teaching is, well, then if I have to live here, how do I live in exile? How do I live here? How do we live in this place? Because that's the thing we need to know. Josh, like I said, did a great job last week, and he explained how you can find yourself in exile in many ways. The cultures that existed in the ancient Near East, there was 3 dominant powers that came and went. And each of them had a way of dealing with their captives and their people. And the Egyptians, you can look at it this way. The Egyptians, they had a way of dealing with the people that they would conquer. They would enslave you. And you could think back to all the slave labor and the Exodus story and the things that go on. That was the way they would deal with a conquered group of people. They would turn them into human machinery. But the problem with that is that human machinery rebels and leaves. Or then along came the Assyrians, and they were, if Egypt is down south there at the, because Egypt is in Africa, if you don't know that, but it's south from all the place of Israel. And then north of Israel, way up there towards like Turkey now, was the Assyrians. And it was a brutal regime that rose to power. And when they came up, they're like, look, we'll just deal with it the way we deal with everything. We'll just kill you. Like, we will slaughter you. And so if you stand in our way, they were famous for taking the bodies of the captives that they had and placing them on poles outside their city walls, just as a sign to say, this is what we're going to do to you. And anyone who opposes us, we'll just kill you. So don't stand in our way. Pay taxes, do what we want. But if you oppose us, we'll just slaughter you. And then along came the Babylonians. They were the major player in the Old Testament of world powers that arose. And there was, in fact, no other regime that ever rose like the Babylonians. And they dominated by simply assimilating people into their culture. They're like, look, we don't want to make you slaves because then you're going to rebel. We don't want to kill you because then we lose economic power in the way that we can move things forward. Actually, what we just want to do is turn you into Babylonians. Like, so we are going to give you a new education, give you new clothes, give you a new name. Josh went through all of that last week. If you missed it, go back and listen to it. Because there's a threat in exile that you're just going to lose yourself and you're going to lose your identity. And Josh asked, like, who has your heart? Because in exile, you need to know who has your heart. It begins, all of this stuff of how you live in exile begins with knowing who you are in that space and whose you are. And who has your heart is the biggest indicator of that. But then the question becomes, if they're going to try to change your name and change your clothing and change your diet and change your language and all the stuff of trying to make you and turn you into a Babylonian, how do you live in that space? And that's a question we have to ask. How do you live if this world is not your home? If you, like those of faith in the book of Hebrews, are sojourners or exiles who go, this isn't quite home yet, how do you live out your life without just being transformed into the image of Babylon, or maybe we could say the image of America, or if you grew up in France, the image of France, or Egypt, or Nigeria, or Russia, or whatever nation state we divide into as a globe and take sides in. How do you keep yourself from falling into being reshaped, reformed, and remolded into that image rather than the image that God has for you? Because in so many ways in this modern world that you live in, you have to understand that everything is trying to reshape you and remold you into another image, another likeness other than that of God. And it's doing it not with hard power, but with what many people call soft power. It's the subtle ways in which marketers use things to exploit you and train you around algorithms and ways of marketing to you and getting you to buy the way they want you to be and who you should become. How do you keep from being transformed into that? and maintain who you're supposed to be in exile. That's where we're at. But the part of the answer, Jeremiah wrote to them when they were going into Babylon. We read this part of the letter that Jeremiah sent to them the first week of the series. But he says, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Here's how you're to conduct yourself. Build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. It's like make a life there. You're going to live there and die there. Make a life there. You're not going home. You're going to be in exile. But he goes, and this is the end. He goes, also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. He goes, seek the good, or seek the peace of the city. And that word peace, that's a heavy Hebrew word. You guys know the Hebrew word for peace, yeah? What is it? Shalom. You see that as a greeting at times. As you find somebody who's Jewish, they'll greet you with this. Shalom. Shalom is not peace like we think of it in America. In America, we think of peace as the absence of conflict or the absence of war. And how do we do that? Well, if we have bigger guns than you and bigger weapons than you, then you won't fight against us, and that's how we keep the peace. That's how peace works often. It's just the absence of conflict. In many ways, you think of your marriage as a place of peace. You think, oh, well, we're not fighting, so it's at peace. But you know something's not right. Something's still off. Because that's not the understanding of peace that we're given in Scripture. This Jewish understanding of peace was this idea of wholeness, flourishing. Shalom meant not when there's no conflict. It meant when all things are set right and the way they should be. Where there doesn't need to be guns to keep the peace or weapons to make it happen. It's the way humans are supposed to flourish. That is shalom. And he goes, listen, when you're there in Babylon, what you would call the enemy, those liberal Babylonians, when you're finding yourself there, here's what I want you to do for those people that have opposed you, drug you off into exile. I want you to seek their shalom. How about them apples? Like that's, you go, really? Seek the shalom of like the enemy? That feels like compromise. That feels like collusion. That feels like giving in. He goes, no. That's not what it is. And the story that we have before us today in Daniel 3 is the story of three men who sought to live this way of shalom. And what they did, what they chose, how they live, has so much to teach us about how we live in our own exile here in America. So, read with me. This place. Daniel 1, by the way, is when what Josh shared about last week. They're brought into captivity. They're tried to be forced into the mold of all of that, but they still choose. Like they're like, we take the Daniel diet, we're going to do it, and they were 10 times better than all the other people. But it's way bigger than that. But they did that. Daniel 2. Daniel interprets a dream for Nebuchadnezzar, and then he's exalted to one of the highest officials in all of Babylon. And then he's like, hey, look, I got my buddies Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can you please like bring them with me? And Nebuchadnezzar's like, whatever you want. And so these four get elevated to the highest court officials in the land, some of the highest people in the land. And now we come to Daniel 3, and we're going to see what happens to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So for those of you who aren't used to measuring things in cubits, that's 90 feet high by 9 feet wide. So ridiculously tall and thin. And so it's something that it's just the proportions of it are a bit odd, but you could just imagine this long, either an obelisk that rose up or some sort of pedestal that they would place the image of a god upon. But they put this image of gold and this thing that he's like, this is what you're supposed to look like. This is what you're to worship. They put this god up there. And he said, this is what happened. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So he's bringing all of these people, all the prefects, all the governors, all of them are coming. And Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they've been made these officials. And so they're invited to come to this place. And so the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, you see how it just repeats it? It's doing it on purpose. Magistrates and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So they're all just showing up, and you can imagine Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm like, didn't Daniel just warn him about like an image of gold, and he's putting it up, and like, what a dork, I cannot believe. Now, they're not saying it to his face, but they're like, what is going on? And again, this isn't the text, I don't know, but I'm just imagining if I'm there and I'm just like, what is he doing? All right, fine, let's go, let's do it. Like, we got to be there. And then he says this, he goes, the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language. So you can understand, all of these officials are made up of not just native Babylonians, but people from other places that they've accumulated. He says, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, when the band starts playing, essentially, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. And all of a sudden, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go, oh, well, shoot, this isn't just a dedication of his latest and greatest tower. Okay, so therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow down. They didn't do it. Maybe in their minds were those words in the Ten Commandments that cautioned them and warned them. Make no graven image. Do not put an image into any rock or gold or anything. And you shall have no other gods before me, as he begins those 10 words he gives to them on Mount Sinai. Maybe that's what's ringing through their head, and they're like, we can't do this. We cannot have this happen. And so sure enough, they didn't do it. And some people came and they complained to King Nebuchadnezzar, and they're like, hey, King Neb, you need to know that like these guys, they did not bow down when the band started to play. And so this is where the story goes. There are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. They're not serving you the way you want to be served. They're not doing what you've commanded them to do. Jealousy, who knows what it is, but these men have found a way to just knock these guys down a few notches and send them to the furnace. And so, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true? Like, guys, help me out with this. Verify for me. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, listen, fellas, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. Like, here's your chance. Prove it. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. We don't have to defend ourselves. There's something in this of like, they understood who their defender was. They go, we don't need to defend ourselves. I mean, how often do we want to like defend ourselves? To like scramble, to kind of figure out what to say and how to say it and like convince, they're like, we don't need to defend ourselves. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But, you gotta love this, even if he does not, we want you to know, and notice, your majesty, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. We're not doing it. Your majesty. Notice they're still respectful. They're still kind. They're not fighting against them. So Nebuchadnezzar, he was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. And so he throws them in, tied up, bound, like, you're done. And then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. It's like they just went through that. A fire hot enough to kill the soldiers who were dragging them to throw them in. But now there wasn't even the stench of smoke on them. Like, you guys, a lot of you know what it's like to go through a furnace. To go in a place of exile where things are not going wrong, or things are not going well, they're going wrong. Whether it was the home that you were raised in, maybe it was a train wreck from day one in your life. Abuse that you endured, things that you went through. And you know people like this who've gone through painful things. Maybe it's the loss of a child or the loss of a job or a marriage that's struggling, and it's like the stench of all that evil just hangs on them. It wasn't that you wanted to do that or that you were even complicit in it, but the smell of it just hangs around that person. And it's like, you just know that. It's like dominating their life. It's what they're going through. Here's what's incredible about what he's saying. This person came through all of that. These 3 men, they walked through all of that, and they didn't even smell like the fire that they were placed into. What would that be like in your life or in your friends' lives who have gone through hell and they didn't even want to. They didn't even ask for it. Maybe they didn't even complicit in it. But they've gone through it, and like the stench of it just sits on them as they're continually just oppressed by that thing that they've come through. Maybe there's a way to even walk through things where that smell doesn't even stay around. And they come out of the fire and it's not even with them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, his Malach, it says, and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Wow. Wow. He goes, what is this? And then he ends with this. He goes, for no other God No other God can save in this way. Think about it. A lot of people's prayers would have been, God, can you just extinguish the fire? And he certainly could have done it. Could have been like, I'm just going to send a cold breeze from heaven and whoosh, gone. You don't even have to go through the fire. No, he did not go about it that way. He allowed them to go into the fire, to be in that furnace, in those flames, so that he could show what he does and show how he rescues in that space. And how was it that he rescued? What was Nebuchadnezzar's proclamation? Or first thing he said, is there a fourth man in that fire? One who has the image of a son of God, an angel. And we don't know what that exactly was. It seems as though it was God himself in that space with them. Some commentators and people would say, well, it was Jesus in that space. And sure, we could say that there was a version of Jesus that has shown up in that space, but one like man that was there in that space with them, going through it with them in that space. What God saves like that, not saves from the flames, but saves through the flames. Who comes to be with his people in the midst, not just of exile, but even the furnace itself that's in exile. Where you step into that, what other God saves that way? And I think this puts on display for us this way of living in exile. How we go through it. Their courage was remarkable. They didn't seek death. But they also didn't shirk away from it. They didn't dodge it. They didn't avoid it. They refused to betray their God, even in the light of the real possibility that they may die for their stand. And what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show us is that there really is a third way to go and to live. Oftentimes we think of how we live in this culture, how we deal with this, is that, we have to fight against this thing. We have to take this way where we're just going to push back, and there is a revolt against this way. And usually in that revolt in America, it takes one color or the other, red or blue. And we're going to pick a side and we're going to revolt against the other side. And we're going to make the other side the enemy. And we're going to revolt and rebel. Or maybe in our revolt, we're just going to shrink away and just kind of hide in the shadows. But we're going to fight the powers and we're going to push back against that. Or there's just this way of compromise. Where it's you know what? Let's just give up and give in and go with the flow. Let's not make a big stink about this. Let's just get on with life and in that place. But what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego paint for us is a third way. Jeremiah's third way. It's the way of shalom. This way of subversive loyalty. Where they are willing to come and seek the good of the city, the shalom of the city, the shalom of Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to seek its well-being. But they do it by laying down their lives, not by taking others' lives, not by making Nebuchadnezzar the enemy. But by making somebody, Nebuchadnezzar and all the powers that be, somebody that they're fighting for. That they want to be in that space. And they choose to serve Babylon, to seek its good. But never, never to let their loyalty move from God. That is a third way to live. It is a hard way to live. And man, we have a challenge living in this culture at this time to find that way where you seek the good, the shalom of the city and the nation that you've been placed into. But you never once let your loyalties shift to it. Your loyalties belong to God and to God alone. You reject the idolatrous redefinitions of good and evil that our own culture would try to put in that place. You refuse to bow down to the images that would be placed around you to worship. And you think, well, we don't worship like idols. Like no one's erecting a big giant statue and asking us to bow down to it. Like that's no. Idol worship doesn't work like that now. In fact, you don't need somebody to erect an idol for you. You're really good at it yourself. John Calvin, he said this. I have a quote there from him. If you pull that up. John Calvin said, the human heart is a factory of idols. Every one of us is from his mother's womb an expert in inventing idols. You're going to create things of what you believe is the good life, the right. Hear it this way. What did Nebuchadnezzar erect in the plain of Dura? An image. What are we not to make things? Engraved images. What do we want is the image of that good life. The image we're seeking, the thing that's there, the thing that's being painted for you and for me in so many ways, to compromise, to settle in, to find ourselves in that space where we go the way of Babylon. And we find ourselves in this place. But here's the thing. This subversive loyalty, this way of going about this, it's what Peter wrote to the church about. In 1 Peter 2:11, pull that up. He says, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. It just wants to eat you. He goes, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may say your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. He goes, listen, when you live in this place where you are pursuing a subversive loyalty, you are going to be both offensive and attractive at the same time to the culture that you're living in. Think about it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to bow down to that image. They're like, we're not going to do this. We're not going to be this. And so they were outed by other people of the court. And then Nebuchadnezzar's own anger raged as he took offense that they would not bow down to the thing he wanted them to bow down to. And they're like, your majesty, we will serve you, but we will not bow down to this. That's offensive. But at the same time, at the end of the story, Nebuchadnezzar's going, what God can save like this? Who has a God like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Look at what this is. And there's an attractiveness to this where they see this. And when you see what Peter's writing to them, he goes, look, live such good lives that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of his coming. It's both an offensiveness and an attractiveness that you carry. And here's the thing about the third way is you're not one or the other. You're both. Some of you've just decided to be downright offensive to people. Like it's like you're not, there's nothing attractive. You just offend all the people who live in this place. Like it's one of those things where you just take the way of, I don't know, maybe you pick a red or a blue side. And then you call that God's way, and then you start to find yourself offending people, not because you're following Jesus, but because you're just religious and hypocritical. And you're just offensive. Others of you just want to be attractive. And let's be honest, that's probably a lot of us in this room. I mean, who doesn't want to be attractive, right? But you want to be attractive to the culture. You don't want to offend anybody. So you just stay quiet. You don't ever refuse to bend the knee. You bend it every time you can because you don't want to be offensive to anybody. And so you don't stand up at the moments you should. You just go along with everybody else. And here's the thing. Do you not realize that Jesus was this perfect mixture of both offensive and attractive? He ticked people off wherever he went. He called them sinners. He told them, you shouldn't live this way. He told the Pharisees that they were religious hypocrites and blind guides. He offended both the irreligious and the religious alike. But at the same time, there was a compelling thing that attracted everybody to him, where they saw him and they wanted him. They pursued him. See, if you're constantly just attractive to people thinking, well, if they'll think it's cool to be a Christian. If they notice that I'm cool and that I don't get offended by things and I'm good with everything in the world and I'm good with everything in culture. I don't get bent over any of these things. I'm fine with it. Like, do you understand that if there's never anything where someone takes offense, that maybe you're not taking the way of Jesus at all? You're not living a way of subversive loyalty. You're not taking the third way. You're just taking our culture's way. And there is no difference in you than any other person that they come across. There should be a combination of these two things where you're seeking the welfare of a community that is hostile to our faith. And this is not for the squeamish or the half-hearted or the cynical or bewildered or angry or dispirited. And we can't let resistance or resignation or resentment get in our way. Look, I'm not an expert in this. I'm not going to claim to be. But I can see that God wants me to get over any of my stuff and join him in being in exile. But in a way that is subversively loyal to him and to him alone. And it's so important that we grab that and understand that, where you're taking the third way. Now let me ask you, as the band comes up and we close, let me ask you a question. And it's one of those questions that when I ask it, you're going to be like, oh, that should have been obvious. But it's not. Where was Daniel? The book is called the Book of... And here's the story of his three friends that he exalted with him into power. And he was made one of the chief officials in all the land. And at the moment when all the officials are gathered up into this space at the dedication of this temple, and they're all called to this place over and over and over again, it says, all of them were called, all of them were called, all of them were called. Why isn't Daniel thrown into the fire? Now, some people said, well, he's on vacation that day. And maybe. Others have said, well, he was a busy court official. He's probably away on some business for the king at that point in time. And yeah, maybe that's a possibility too. But don't you think in a book that bears his own name, don't you think for a moment that it would have said, and Daniel was off on business? But it doesn't, not once. I think in some ways it's left to you as the reader going through this story to start going, wait a second, where was Daniel? Let me give you a possibility. He bent the knee. He bowed down. I'm not saying he did, because the text doesn't say he did. But it also doesn't say he didn't. And there's something to that as you're reading through it going, wait a second, this is the book of Daniel. Where's Daniel? It doesn't mention him. Maybe it doesn't mention him because he bowed down with all the rest. Just like you. Just like me. We bend a knee and we take the image of what this world wants to reshape us into. Shaped by Instagram profiles and our culture's own convictions. Not wanting to be offensive, just wanting to be attractive. And so we go with the way of the world. Everybody starts talking about all religions are the same. Everything leads the same way. You just try to push back against that and you will see really quickly how offensive you become. You go, no, all of them are not the same. And somebody's like, oh. How about this? You say in our world, every single life, whether in the womb or 150 years old, has immense value because it's something handcrafted by God and made in his image. And it has infinite worth. And should not be killed. Should not be avoided. And you want to see how quickly you become offensive? Or maybe you go, look, I can do whatever I want with my body. Sleep with who I want to sleep with, go where I want to go, do what I want to do. And you push back against that and say, no, that's not the way I'm going to handle my body. And we should handle our bodies. You go, in fact, it says in Corinthians, I was bought with a price, and I'm not my own. And I'm going to honor and glorify God with my body. And you see how quickly you get pushed back on. But unfortunately, many of us have taken the way that maybe Daniel took. And you bent the knee. Here's what I want you to hear today. The same words that Daniel heard, maybe that day, sitting next to Nebuchadnezzar, his third in the land. Wait. Isn't there a fourth man in the fire? Could you imagine Daniel hearing those words and going, should have been me. That should have been me. I should have been the fourth man in the fire, but it wasn't me. It was God. And he showed up and he rescued. And what I want you to know today is there is a fourth man in the fire, not just for them, but for you, who has taken your place in that space, not because you are worthy of it, but because you were unworthy, and because he chose you, because he loves you, and he comes for you, and he pursues you, not because you did it all right, but because you've done it all wrong, and we found ourselves away from home, separated from him, separated from the life we were meant to have, and he goes, but I've come to be with you in that space, and I am the fourth one in the fire, and I am there, and I've taken your place, and so fear not, for I am with you, and you are mine, and I am yours. And there will be a day that comes when you'll get another shot. And at that time, you can choose. And Daniel, he did. Years later, Babylon's overthrown by the Persians. And another king says, hey, bend the knee and don't pray except to me. And Daniel refuses. And he's thrown into a lion's den. And the king comes the next morning and goes, Daniel, are you still there? He goes, yes, because God sent his angel to be with me in the lion's den and to shut the mouth of the lion. Same phrasing from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel, his Malach, to be with me. I want you to know as you take this way of subversive loyalty, it will not be easy. It will be hard. It may cost you everything. But this isn't your home. You're seeking a city whose foundation and builder is God. Don't settle. Refuse to settle. And seek by faith that home that is coming. If you'd stand. As you come today to take, receive the body and the blood of Christ, may you know that you're receiving the body and the blood of the one who took your place in that fire, who stared into the flames of death and hell and said, I'm going there for you. And so take that, receive that gladly into yourself. And for those of you here, you don't know Jesus in that way. Man, I want you to know him that way. I want you to know that you have that one in the fire who is for you. And maybe today you begin that relationship with him, with the lover of your soul, of your body, of everything, the maker of you. And for those of you who do know him, but know you've bowed a knee and been reshaped into another image, come today and receive the image of the one who was broken for you and blood poured out for you, and know that he has never stopped pursuing you. And may that heal your wounded heart today. Please come. So